Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, deathly sirs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, government workers. I'm usually welcome. And so today I want to talk about all these giant federal employee layoffs by Trump. Right now, apparently the numbers up to 300,000 federal workers have been fired in 7 days, 10% of the federal workforce, according to what I've looked at so far. Of course, the unfortunate side of it, a lot of them only got 30 minutes notice. So my hearts go out to a lot of federal employees, that, particularly ones who were recently hired. They were the ones that went first, and to give that shorter notice and to be thrown into the economy and have to restart their lives is very unfortunate. 75,000 of them took the buyout offer to resign and take 8 weeks worth of pay. And apparently up to 15,000 IRS workers are to be fired next. And so this is a big deal. And uh, I have mixed feelings about it. One thing I will have to say, considering some of my libertarian leanings, the idea of shrinking the federal government is badly needed. I think that a lot of these bureaucracies and government agencies have gotten completely bloated, and it needs to be addressed. And I think a lot of the redundancy and a lot of the ineffectiveness. Of course, prior to all this happening, we found out that only about 6% of government workers were even going into the office. All of them were working remotely with limited effectiveness in a lot of cases. So this is huge, and it'll save the government a lot of money. So in the big picture, it's probably something that needed to be done, but to have it done this quickly and this drastically is definitely turning a lot of heads. And it also comes at a time when, of course, we're seeing huge layoffs. We have the retail collapse going on. We have massive corporate layoffs going on all over the country. And these jobs are disappearing, and they're not coming back. And then, of course, this trend will continue. With AI and automation is only going to accelerate this. So we're going to have a lot of people, both from the private sector and the public sector, both going into the unemployment lines. And we're also in a market where finding a new job is particularly difficult. It's the most difficult it's been in many generations. Well, I shouldn't say generations, many years. And so that's an unfortunate thing for a lot of these uh, fired federal employees are going to have to face. And but another component of this, of course, is the fact that these federal workers are all paid by the taxpayer, and a lot of federal jobs pay a lot more than they do in the private sector. And so one has to realistically look at the fact that all these government jobs are subsidized by the taxpayers, and it shouldn't be necessarily fair for, say, someone like me who worked as a chef my whole life. So I'm a chef in some bumfuck restaurant in downtown Seattle, and my taxpayer money goes to pay what could be argued as overpaid government bureaucrats. Um, and as I say, a lot of these departments can be shrunk. Their employee base can be shrunk without anyone really feeling the effects. And so that's one thing to factor into this, that in a lot of ways, government jobs are exploitive of all the people in the private sector, and also the fact that government workers, for example, for many years had a lot of protections and couldn't be fired. And not only that, they get pretty fat government pensions. And that's something I'm thinking about as well. Of course, is that 300,000 federal workers have been laid off, but I assume that they're all still going to get their government pensions. So we're not all off the hook when these federal workers disappear from being employed. There's still a lot of money that's going to be going out in pensions. So that's something I haven't seen anyone talk about yet, because a lot of these pensions are a pretty high percentage of their wages. So if a lot of the older ones, if they retire, even though they're not going to be in the federal workforce anymore, they're still going to be paying fairly large pensions slash salaries for the remainder of their lives. So that's a hidden part of this quotient. Another hidden part of this quotient that was brought up in a Mises article I read that was really interesting is that there's 3 million total federal workers and 1 million in the military. Um, but the hidden part of this is there's 5 million contract workers and 1.8 million grant workers. So these are NGOs. They're not federal workers. They're not specifically attached to the government, but 7.5 million workers as of 2023 are federally funded, but they're not part of the federal workforce. And in 2023, $760 billion went out to these non-government government workers and 300 billion grants. So there's nearly $1 trillion that nobody's looking at right now in people that don't work for the federal government but are paid by the federal government. And once again, that's all money that comes from the taxpayers. And we're seeing that a lot of these kind of organizations, a lot of non-governmental workers, for example, that are associated with U.S. aid, they're not being addressed right now. Although certainly the gutting of U.S. aid, a lot of this money is going to be cut off. There's not going to be the grants. There's not going to be the contract workers. So a lot of them will be hit by this. And USAID is a good example. They had 10,000 workers, which seems fairly bloated to me, but now 8,000 of them were fired. And once again, it hides the fact that 8,000 direct federal workers for USAID were fired, but there's probably tens of thousands of people associated with contracts and grants given up by USAID that will be affected by this. And so that also ties in with the fact that job growth, particularly for the last 4 years, was driven by mostly illegal hires and then incredible amounts of government hires. And part of that was people being hired to fluff up the jobs numbers for the Biden administration, but part of it also was a lot of new federal workers were hired to address immigrant problems all over the country. But for the last 4 years, we've had stunning numbers of government workers hired. I remember one month, 86,000 government workers were hired in one quarter, and so that really distorts employment numbers. So anyway, the big picture, I guess the question is, so now 300,000 federal workers and more to come have left the federal government and fired, and at some point it's going to ripple through all the NGOs and all the people that depend on grants and federal contracts. And I don't know if they're going to take a closer look at that as a separate issue. I assume as DOGE addresses agency after agency, a lot of these people are going to disappear as well. But it's something to be brought up, and something that may make the headlines at some point, because if we have 3 million directly hired and employed federal workers, we have nearly over twice that, as a matter of fact, over twice that, 7.5 million workers that are federally funded but don't actually officially work for the government. So that's the 800 pound, well, maybe it's a 1,600 pound gorilla in the room, and let's see what happens moving forward. I'm useful at it. Don't you be one too.